All right, A's fans, there's been a change within the past couple of hours. The A's game 3 tomorrow against Detroit, is going to start at 1:30 our time. They're saying it because the weather is bad in Detroit. More than likely, television said, start that in the afternoon so we can play the New York team, the Mets, at 5 o'clock. So 1:30 tomorrow, the A's game against Detroit. The A's trying to stay alive. The former A, Corey Lytle, of course, in the hearts and minds of everyone who follows sports. And you know the story from yesterday. Lytle, around noon Pacific time, flew his Cirrus SR-20 airplane into the side of a 50-story high-rise in Manhattan. The latest investigators searching the scene for evidence. They recovered the instrument panel as they try to figure out exactly how the accident occurred. And one other note on this now, his insurance from Major League Baseball, which would provide roughly $1.5 million for Lytle's wife and son. The late word tonight is, if it's proven that Lytle was flying that plane, the insurance would be canceled. We have the great traffic reporter, George Rask, who, you've owned 5 planes at one time, George?
Oh, yeah, I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
First off, you hear the news, and that's what you do for a living. I mean, your planes were similar to what Lytle was flying?
Yeah, they were single-engine planes,
okay.
High performance, 4-place.
Right.
Different brand, because the Cirrus model is a very new technology, new design. The company's only been in business since 1999, but they've had a lot of market penetration, because it's a really innovative design.
But what did you think immediately?
Well, the first thing I thought when I heard impact was I figured, uh-oh, here we go again. When we heard it was a light plane and it was determined it was actually a light airplane, I really figured it was an accident. And, you know, the corridor where they were flying, Gary, it's uncontrolled airspace, and it's not far from Teterboro Airport, and it puts them sort of right on the verge of all these high-rise buildings. So it's almost inevitable that somebody was going to fly an airplane into a building.
Those of us who don't fly, their initial reaction is, what was he doing flying so close to high-rises in Manhattan?
Well, in part, he's restricted to a limited amount of airspace. If you're flying near controlled airspace, and New York is fraught with controlled airspace, it's Class B airspace. Here's a shot of him, I think, flying. Yeah, it's a shot of him flying his airplane. You have to imagine it's like a wedding cake upside down. So the airspace gets higher and higher the further away from the airport you go. The closer to the airport, the controlled airspace is down low. So he was required to stay at a low altitude, not a high altitude. He was restricted to 1,100 feet. So there was really no way for him to get away from those tall buildings.
How will they determine, or how do they determine whether or not he was flying or not?
Well, it's not a very pretty image, but the way the NTSB determines who is at the controls generally is they look at the body and they examine the broken bones. Because usually the pilot in command, the PIC, will have his fingers broken and his ankles broken because he will have had his feet on the rudder pedals. Because you need to have your feet involved when you're flying. So you've got control stick here and your feet are also engaged.
And they can tell by going that route whether or not he was flying.
Yeah. And it's often the case that, in this case, he was flying with his flight instructor, his certified CFI, certified flight instructor. So it's likely that the two of them, if they experience some kind of trouble, and there have been some eyewitness reports, Gary, that say that they heard the engine sputtering. And in most cases, when there's a small airplane that has, that has a crash, it's usually an engine problem. And if there's an engine problem, it's usually because there was fuel. It was a fuel-related problem.
How much risk is there? And again, I'm going off 3 hours on the radio today where people, it's just as dangerous to drive a car.
More so.
Okay.
In terms of passenger miles
traveled. Let me give you my comeback here. But if you're going to live in this society, it's almost a necessity that you drive a car. Be it you have to get your child to a soccer practice, whether you have to go to the grocery store, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think it's a necessity that you fly a plane. I guess here's my thing, George. You're a single man, no children?
Right.
How about if you have a child, if you have loved ones, people that you are responsible for? You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I do. And, you know, I mean, there's differing schools of thought on it. I think you have to take your spouse into consideration. But I don't think that the risks themselves are such that you should, if you have kids, you shouldn't fly. I mean, and let's look at it. Here's a guy with a lot of income, young fella. He gets the bug. And this is what happens to most people.
But here's my thing, too, and I'll follow up, let you finish.
Okay.
When I hear that he was doing this as a recreation, isn't flying to the point where if this is your job, I understand it. If you're a single man, I understand, or single man or woman. But if you're doing this and putting your family in danger because it's recreation, to me, I think it's at the very least, it's worth questioning.
Hey, if he was a rock climber, he could fall and break his neck. If he was a kayaker, he could drown. There's all kinds of recreation. And really, in truth, general aviation in and of itself is one of the safest recreations around. So I don't really think we want to knock that. The problem is, if something goes wrong in an airplane, boy, your options are pretty limited.
Was that a nice plane that he was flying?
The Cirrus, yeah. They make 3 different
models.
But
$185,000, that kind of caught me off guard. I mean, you know, that doesn't sound like a lot for an airplane.
You know, the top of their line is probably about $300,000, and he might have bought that airplane used. $330,000, $350,000 is the top of the line for that Cirrus airplane. So they're not very large, but they're beautifully equipped. They sort of look like they've got the look of a European sports car about them.
Okay.
Certain kind of sex appeal. And you know, as I say, the aviation bug, when it bites you. When I took my first flying lesson, I said, man, this is what I got to do. As I told you, I was a stockbroker, started taking flying lessons, and when I took my first lesson, I said, I want to spend all my time at the airport.
And I want to let you know, George left the stock market when it was during the bull period.
The greatest
so you
bull market
weren't
in
running
history.
from anything.
Yeah.
You were feeling good.
Yeah.
Can you imagine, George, if I can be light for a moment, you left the stock market at an all-time high to come and say, it's now 4:25. Welcome to KRON AM. Huh?
Well, no, it's an interesting evolution because I was in aviation, and there's, you know, aviation is one sphere of experience, broadcasting another, and they overlap in the area of traffic watch.
Okay.
And I worked for an aviation company that had contracts with radio stations to provide traffic watch for them. Okay. And I was actually filling in for one of our announcers when a major news story broke, and I was forced to cover it against my protestations to the contrary. Mount St. Helens erupted.
Wow.
And I was up in the air when it happened, and you know, I called the radio station and said, get a reporter out here. We need somebody to cover it. And they said, you're it. So that's it. I went on the air, started covering the eruption, and the next day the radio station offered me a job. And
the rest is history.
The rest, as they say.
Yeah. All right. What we're going to do is talk a little bit more with George about this. Put up the graphic for you people, and believe me, I know from the radio today. If you can put up the graphic, the email graphic. Send us one here at KRON, your reaction to, basically, my theory is on flying an airplane, and hey, I'm a million miles away from this, but I'm just going to say, if you have responsibilities and people counting on you, like Corey Lytle, I know it's very sensitive, but indeed, how do you feel on this? George says, hey, you can't, if that's what you want to do, right? If that's what makes you feel good,
do it.
All right, we'll come back in a moment, talk more with the great George Rask.